All right, so are you ready to dive deep into the world of modern love and relationships today?
I am so ready. Let's go.
Okay, perfect, because you shared this amazing interview with Jay Shetty and relationship coach Matthew Hussey. And honestly, I'm already like completely intrigued. I feel like there are so many good insights in here about finding and building those really strong connections, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think Jay and Matthew, they really get to the core of what makes relationships work.
Yeah.
And even more importantly, how we can help them thrive in, today's world.
I love that. So they start off by talking about how like our early ideas of love, it's almost like we have these blueprints that we develop and those are often shaped by like how we grew up. So,
Mhm.
family dynamics, what we see in the media, that kind of stuff. And I think it's super insightful that they both share their personal journeys, especially how, those early influences ended up playing a role in their own love lives.
You know what really struck me was how they both talked about how the things that they valued in relationships changed as they got older. And Matthew specifically talked about how finding peace became super important for him later on in life. And he realized that chasing those super intense highs and lows wasn't actually fulfilling. I think a lot of people can relate to that looking back on
Yeah.
those past relationships that felt more like a roller coaster than, a steady journey.
Totally. It makes you wonder if sometimes we're kind of drawn to that chaos, even if it's not healthy for us in the long run. And he tells this funny story about how he used to be addicted to being late on purpose, just for that little like rush of adrenaline.
Oh yeah, I remember that. It's
Yeah.
like he was subconsciously seeking out those mini dramas throughout the day, which is so interesting. And then he contrasted that with the feeling of coming home that he felt when he met his wife, Audrey. Like he said that he felt really seen and understood by her. And it wasn't even just about feeling safe. It was about feeling deeply connected.
Mm.
It's mind blowing that they talked for 8 hours straight the first night that they met.
8 hours. That's crazy. So, they have this initial excitement, but then they transition to talking about the difference between a peaceful relationship and one that's just boring.
Mm,
Did you feel like they were saying that peace equals settling?
not at all.
Mm.
I think for Matthew, peace wasn't about a lack of excitement. It was about feeling deeply at home with someone.
Mm.
He emphasized that safety is really important, but it can't be the only foundation for a good relationship. It's about resonating with someone on a much deeper level.
Yeah, I think that's such a valuable distinction. It's not about settling for a boring or passionless relationship, but finding a connection where you can really be yourself. And I think that ties into their discussion about vulnerability. Matthew talks about how his early attempts at being vulnerable actually like backfired. Remember that story he shared about opening up to someone about an insecurity?
Yeah.
And they basically told him that it was unattractive.
Oh, yeah. Ouch. That's got hurt.
Yeah. I know,
Mm.
right? It makes you think about how much we risk when we open ourselves up, but also the potential reward of having a real connection with somebody. Have you ever been afraid to be vulnerable in a relationship?
Definitely. I think everyone has those moments where they hold back a little bit, whether it's out of fear of rejection or just wanting to protect yourself. You know,
So, how do you find that balance between protecting yourself and allowing yourself to be truly seen?
that is the question, right? I think a big part of it is finding someone who creates that safe space for you, someone who responds with empathy and understanding and not judgment or criticism.
That's so true. It makes you realize how crucial that foundation of trust is, especially when you're first starting out with someone. But then they bring in this whole other layer of complexity. The fact that we have so many options in modern dating, it feels like we're constantly comparing and analyzing and second guessing. It's almost impossible to just be present and enjoy the process.
It really is. We're stuck in this state of what if, always wondering if there's someone better out there. They talk about comparing potential partners to percentages. And I thought that was such a good analogy.
Yeah.
Oh, he's a 75%, but maybe there's an 80% out there.
Oh my God, yes. And I think social media makes that so much worse. It's so easy to get caught up in the highlight reel of other people's relationships.
Definitely. And then Matthew uses this great analogy of comparing finding a partner to building a dream career.
Yeah.
We don't just usually stumble upon our ideal job right away. It takes work and evolution and maybe even a few detours along the way. He's basically saying that love is similar.
Yeah. We have to be willing to put in the effort and grow and be open to change.
Exactly. And speaking of putting in the effort, they talk about Matthew's decision to quote unquote settle on Audrey, which I thought was a fascinating phrase.
Yeah, it's a little provocative, right?
Yeah.
But the way he explains it, it's not about settling for less. It's about making a conscious decision to invest in building something extraordinary.
Exactly. He's not saying she was the only option. It's about seeing the potential to create something amazing together.
I love how he reframes that whole idea of settling. It's not about settling for mediocrity. It's about committing to the journey of creating something meaningful with someone.
It's a powerful reminder that the extraordinary isn't something you just find, it's something you cultivate.
Mm.
And that brings us to the importance of setting standards in relationships, which they talk about next. And it's about knowing what really matters to you and like being willing to walk away from anything that doesn't. They make this really important distinction between like standards that are based on your ego versus standards that are rooted in what truly makes you happy.
Yeah, it's hard to tell the difference sometimes, you know? Like, we all have preferences, but when do they become deal breakers? And when are we just being picky?
Totally. To illustrate this point, Matthew brings up this hilarious TikTok account called Guy with the List.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, this guy adds every girl's dating ex to a running list of what not to be.
Oh my God, I've seen that. It's so funny, but also kind of scary. Like, how could anyone possibly meet all of those criteria? It just shows you how easy it is to get caught up in those superficial judgments.
Right. And it makes you wonder, are those standards really about finding a good partner? Or are they about trying to control the other person?
It's a good reminder to check ourselves and ask, are my standards coming from a place of self-awareness? Or am I just trying to create like the perfect partner in my head?
Exactly. And then they contrast that with Audrey's approach. She had a very clear, standard, full investment from Matthew before continuing the relationship. It wasn't a superficial list of qualities. It was like a fundamental need for commitment.
I love that. That's such a powerful example of setting a boundary based on your own worth and what you need to feel secure. It's not about manipulating the other person. It's about knowing what you deserve and being willing to walk away if it's not there.
Yeah. And it leads to a really interesting question for all of us. What are our non-negotiables in relationships? Are those deal breakers based on ego, or are they rooted in genuine needs?
Hmm. It's a question I'm still thinking about. I think it takes a lot of self-reflection and maybe even some trial and error, but it's definitely worth exploring. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. They also talk about the importance of having those hard conversations, even in the early stages of dating. Matthew shares this personal story about how he used to avoid expressing his need for alone time, which led to resentment and distance in his relationships.
Uh-huh. I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Uh,
Communicating their needs can feel so vulnerable and risky. But as Matthew found out, avoiding those conversations often just creates bigger problems later on.
it's so true. Those uncomfortable conversations are actually opportunities for growth and connection. By speaking up, you're giving your partner a chance to really understand you and to meet your needs. But it also requires them to be receptive and willing to listen. Have you ever found yourself holding back from expressing your needs in a relationship?
Oh, for sure. Especially in the beginning when you're still trying to figure each other out. But I think what Matthew and Jay are saying is that creating a culture of open communication right from the start is so important.
Yeah, it's about being proactive and setting a tone of honesty and vulnerability. They talk about this idea of leading and modeling the kind of culture you want, rather than just passively mirroring the other person's behavior.
Yeah, Matthew uses this really simple but effective example of choosing to leave a voice note instead of just texting. It's a small gesture, but it adds so much more personality and intimacy to the communication. It's about taking the initiative to connect on a deeper level.
And it's not about demanding a specific response, right? It's about setting an example and hoping that the other person will follow suit.
Exactly. It's about creating an environment where you both feel safe to express yourselves authentically.
Yeah.
And Jay shares his own experience with this. He talks about how he was very upfront with his now wife, Roddy, but his expectations from the very beginning, which allowed them to establish a really healthy dynamic early on.
It sounds like they both recognize the importance of being intentional and proactive.
Absolutely. And that proactive approach also applies to dealing with like the bumps in the road,
Yeah.
the inevitable challenges, including heartbreak. They acknowledge that heartbreak is just a part of life and that there's no quick fix for getting over it. What stood out to me was Matthew's story about feeling inadequate after a breakup.
Yeah, it was such a raw and honest moment. I think it's easy to get caught up in self-blame after a breakup. But Matthew talks about the importance of having compassion for yourself in those moments of pain.
It's about recognizing that heartbreak is a natural part of life and it doesn't diminish your worth.
And they go on to talk about how to reframe those painful experiences as opportunities for growth. Remember that rat experiment they mentioned?
Yes, the one where they showed that rats who felt like they had some control over their suffering
Yeah.
actually experienced less stress.
Yeah, it's a powerful illustration of how choosing our suffering, like finding meaning in it, can make the experience so much more bearable. What have you learned from your own heartbreaks? Have you been able to find those silver linings?
It is a process, for sure, but I think you can always gain something from those experiences, even if it's just a deeper understanding of yourself and what you really want in a relationship.
Yeah, for sure. But it can be hard to see those lessons when you're in the middle of it all, you know? Especially when we hold on to that whole idea of the one that got away. Or right person, wrong time.
Oh, absolutely. That whole romanticized idea can hold us back. Matthew really shuts that myth down, though.
Hmm.
He says that if someone doesn't choose you, they're just not the right person for you.
Wow, it's so simple, but so true.
Hmm?
It's easy to get caught up in what could have been, but we have to focus on the reality of things. And they didn't just focus on getting over heartbreak, they
Yeah.
talked about what makes a relationship last. And they shifted the focus from that initial attraction to the qualities that matter more in the long run.
Yeah, they talked about how compatibility is crucial for being happy long term. Matthew actually breaks it down into 4 levels of importance in a relationship: admiration, mutual attraction, commitment, and finally, compatibility. It's interesting how he said that compatibility, being able to handle each other's stuff, is what makes or breaks a relationship.
It makes you realize that compatibility is more than just shared interests or that initial chemistry. It's about facing life's challenges together, supporting each other through the hard times. Do you think most people underestimate the importance of compatibility?
I think it's easy to overlook when you're caught up in the excitement of a new relationship. But as Matthew points out, being able to work through those tough times together, to understand and support each other, that's what really makes a relationship last.
So it's not just about finding someone who makes you happy, it's about finding someone you can grow with, someone who balances you out and helps you become a better person.
Exactly. It's about finding someone who accepts you for who you are, but also encourages you to be your best self.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. It's so clear that finding and building a lasting relationship isn't about finding that perfect person or waiting for love to just show up. It's about understanding ourselves, setting healthy boundaries, communicating openly, and choosing compatibility over just that initial spark.
They really challenge us to move past those societal expectations and romanticize ideas about love. Instead of just waiting for it to happen, they want us to be more intentional and proactive about relationships.
And remember that love isn't always sunshine and rainbows. It takes effort and vulnerability and a willingness to face the challenges together. I really like something Matthew said. Love is not all you need. You also need compatibility.
That's a great takeaway. It reminds us to look deeper than the surface and consider those qualities that make for a strong partnership.
So, this week I want you to think about the people in your life, romantic or not. What makes you compatible? Where do your differences cause friction? And how can you learn to deal with each other's stuff better? If you want more advice on navigating the world of relationships, I definitely recommend checking out Matthew Hussey's book, Love Life.
It's packed with tips and insights that can help you build stronger and more fulfilling connections.
That's it for this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and don't be afraid to love a stayed.